Yeah, I think we'll just do an audio check maybe, just make sure you can hear me.
What was that?
Just to making sure you can hear me.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Excellent.
Mhm.
Okay, let's pray. God in heaven, we thank you for this blessed Sabbath. We thank you for how you've led us thus far. And we thank you for the histories that we can go over as we're going to remind ourselves of how Protestantism pays homage to the papacy. We ask that your Spirit may be with us and guide our minds in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. Okay, well, happy Sabbath to everyone. We're going to continue with our studies that Elder Tess has been has done since we've been going over for some time. We're nearly at the end of this. I remember when I think it was June last year or something, when I first joined you all. It was we were a while back with the studies, and we're up to, I think this is number 63 or 64, so we've come a long way, and it's wonderful to be able to refresh these things. So with that in mind, it's I wanted to just put this in perspective. So we just went over the ship of Alexandria, and we're just going to refresh our memory just on that, just from last night. So a little bit of a pop quiz to make sure everyone's sharp, but nothing too difficult. But what I wanted to remind us of is this study being done in April 2021, when we take our minds to the studies that we've been doing this year with the Vespers that Elder Tess has been taking, and how we've been realizing that the Sunday law threat is, if we take the whole of it, so what the Sunday law is going to be about, we understand that Protestantism is really only a small part. It's only just a small portion of this, the whole threat, and it's not the whole. It's not the cause. We can see how it plays a role, but now we know from the Trinity, from atheism, men's rights activism, and libertarianism, that these are where our focus is more, for where the Sunday law threat is going to come from. So with that in mind, we know that this study is from last year. So we were, our understanding wasn't as developed. We didn't have the clarity that we have today. So as we go through, we'll just remind ourselves of that. But it's also important to remember how we got to where we are. So, and this is of course why we're going through all these studies. So to start with, the ship of Alexandria, or the line of Alexandria, I guess we call it, we liken it to if we go and go on a hike and go up a mountain, go up a hill, go somewhere that's elevated, and we look out and we can see the curvature of the earth, and we can see from one side to the other, from one horizon to another. And this is pretty much the idea that we get from this whole line of Alexandria. We're seeing from the beginning of modern Israel all the way down to the Second Advent. So this is what the ship of Alexandria does for us. Now, as we went through yesterday, we know the ship of Alexandria, the theme, it's not Paul, is it? It's not focusing on him. It's focusing on the ship. That's the theme of this whole line. So the ship being the two institutions, the United States and Adventism. So just to run quickly through where we're up to, the ship of Alexandria is they all begin in Alexandria and they're loaded with grain, they're loaded with wheat, and their ultimate destination is Puteoli. So they then come to Myra and Lycia, which we mark as being the harvest and bitter. And we know when we apply this to Protestantism is 1844. But just before we continue on that, we'll just remind ourselves of these three structures, I guess. So we're focusing today on Protestantism. So we know one is the counterfeit, and this was 1899 to 1945, and then the next history was 1989, 2001. Next, Protestantism, and we've got 1888, 1950s, and 1979 onwards. And modern Israel, of course, with the Millerites. (1888) and 1989. So what Elder Tess had done was overlaying each of these histories, looking at the counterfeit and overlaying them to compare and contrast them. And what we're doing today is we're focusing on this one here. We're focusing on Protestantism. And mostly the 1888 period and a little bit from the 1950s, but she goes into a bit more detail in the next study, which I think we're doing this afternoon. So this is why we're comparing the ship of Alexandria with modern Israel and Protestantism here. So we got to Myra and Lycia, 1844. And then when this ship begins to get to Snidus, they start to lose their way. And can someone remind us of, for the Millerites in 1863, what we mark as them losing their way?
The rejection of the prophetic message?
Yeah, and do you remember how they did that, or what they did in 1863?
They started organizing the church.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't it specifically the 2520 that they were rejecting?
That's what I was thinking, but yeah, I think you're all correct, Elaine and Phil. So, because this is when they had the next 1863 chart, right? And that had, or didn't have the 2520 on. So we see the Millerites start to lose their way here as well. And then we've got this period of 126 before we get to 1989. And for this ship of Alexandria, Lycia, Paul gives this message, but this message is ignored by those he's giving the message to. So we get down to Euroclydon, and we know that this is where the ship's destruction is inevitable. And do we remember what happens at Euroclydon? There's a certain wind.
The east wind, Islam. Radical Islam.
Yeah, it's the east wind. And what we mark here is there's something that begins in 2001. So now we're in the Omega of modern Israel. There's something that begins to, it's not so obvious. I guess we'll come back, we'll give this example. So we come back to 1798, and that's where we mark the beginning of modern Israel, right? The Alpha. When we think of the messenger here, William Miller, was he in the picture in 1798? Was William Miller preaching and doing things in 1798?
No.
No. So he only rocked up. He only came into the picture, somewhere around here, prior to 1844. But despite that, we still mark, 1798 for various reasons. And in the same way, we mark 2001, not specifically 9/11, but 2001 as a whole year, because there was several things that happened in 2001 that began to then make the destruction of the ship or the two institutions inevitable. It was always going to happen past this point. So even though back here Miller hasn't even been converted yet in 1798, we still mark the beginning here of modern Israel. Now, coming down here, the institution, the Adventism, its destruction is inevitable because we mark this second angel and the third angel here arriving. And when we cast our minds back to ancient Israel, the end of ancient Israel, so Christ's time, the Omega, so we know that the Omega was a line of if we've got failure, we know the Omega is a line of
Success.
Yes.
So therefore we know that the Omega of modern Israel is going to be a line of success. But in ancient Israel, how did that come about? What was the way that allowed ancient Israel, the Omega, to be a success in the way that Christ taught?
The corrections of the mistakes by John the Baptist.
Mm-hmm. And yes, and how did he do that? What kind of, sorry?
Parables.
Yeah. I'm trying not to make it so obvious. I'm trying to get the brains working, all the cogs turning. So thank you. Yes, parable teaching. And this is what allows the Omega of ancient Israel to be a line of success, as we know. So parable teaching, and that's what is going to we know that parable teaching for us is the solution to our problems, but that solution is also meaning the destruction of Adventism, the shipwreck. So, which is the Sunday law. And of course, this parable teaching, which gives us the midnight cry, this not only destroys Adventism, but because twin institutions, the ship, United States, and Adventism. So both of these institutions. So we have between 2001 and the Sunday Law, we're continuing this journey with the ship of Alexandria, and they start to encounter east wind. We mark between these points an increase of knowledge and a formalization. So we know that they're 2019 and 2021, and then these this ship has runs into these east winds and ultimately is shipwrecked, and they end up on this island in Malta, this island of Melita, I believe it is. So we have one ship that starts, and it goes from this is the first ship, and then we have these 3 months here. And this is marking Paul's work on this island of in Malta, and so they've just been shipwrecked, and the first thing they do, they're allowed to, the centurion allows them to get off the ship and swim to shore, and we find that there's a separation of two classes. So it's one group with Paul, they pray to the true God, and the other group pray to the gods that the sailors pray to. Does anyone remember what the name of them was?
Pastor.
Yeah. Excellent. Castor and Pollux. So we have a true and we have a counterfeit. So then we have two events while they're on this island. Two events with Paul. You know, he gets he's trying to gather some firewood and whatnot, and he gets this viper that decides to latch onto his hair, and he doesn't get unwell. They deem it a miracle that he survived, that nothing happens to him. So the inhabitants of this island start to take notice because he hasn't. There's been some kind of miracle happen with Paul, you know. With Publius, he heals, I think it's his father. And so there's two miracles that we mark here. But in this time period that they're here, it's 3 months. And then another ship, they get on this second ship, which is called the Castor and Pollux. And we note that they're taken from here all the way to the second advent. On this second ship by the counterfeit. So that's what the ship's called. Then as they're in this last history here, they get to Syracuse and Rhegium. We mark them feeling ill. Syracuse and at Rhegium, the coins that are stamped with Castor and Pollux. but they encounter, to begin with, unfavorable winds, and then these favorable winds that are going to accelerate their journey from Rhydium to Puteoli, which is the destination where they're carrying all this grain, which was the destination for both of these ships. So this first ship, as we know, was going all the way to Puteoli, but it didn't make it. Now, what we're going to look at today is in a bit more detail relating to Protestantism in 1888, is this Sunday law and what's going to happen at shipwreck. And we're looking at 1888 because we know that Protestantism was trying to enforce the Sunday law in 1888. So to do this, we'll go to the Great Controversy. (442) paragraph 1. And we only need to read just the last sentence and a bit. And this is how the United States is paying homage to the papacy. So the beast with two horns causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, indicates that the authority of this nation is to be exercised in enforcing some observance which shall be an act of homage to the papacy. So we have this homage that Protestantism is going to give. And they're going to do that through enforcing observance. So this is how they're going to pay homage to the papacy. This is how Protestantism is going to do it. Yeah, let's see. Does anyone remember what Puteoli means?
I can't remember. I found on the internet, Smith's Bible Dictionary says it means sulfurous springs. Is that what?
Yeah, that's the Thayer definition I've got as well. But this was, I'm pretty sure, yeah, Puteoli, the destination of all the ships of Alexandria. But they're taking, I can't recall exactly, other than sulfurous springs, what Puteoli, the meaning of it exactly. But I know the purpose of the ships is to bring their grain not all the way to Rome, but Puteoli. This is their destination. And I know in Puteoli, the inhabitants would always watch for these ships of Alexandria coming to bring that grain. You know, they're bringing prosperity and whatnot. They're bringing this grain to then enrich Puteoli, and they pass it on to Rome. So, unless anyone else can remember. So what we're doing is we're using our horizon here from the Second Advent from the beginning of 1798. We're using this structure to have a bit more of an understanding of what's happening here at shipwreck. So we're comparing with the line of Alexandria with Protestantism and seeing what this teaches us and how much more detail we can get. Because we know when we have a big line like this and we're stepping back, we're losing a bit of detail. And if we zoomed in, we'd be able to have a bit more clarity of things. So that's what we're doing here. So we read the quote from the Great Controversy outlining that homage is given through enforcing an observance. Now, this then brings us to the document by Jared Goldstein. Does anyone remember the document that Jared Goldstein wrote?
How the Constitution became Christian?
Yes. So I think we've done definitely been through this one. There's another one that he's done as well. Yeah, this is on nativism, which we're going to touch on a little bit in a moment. But yes, the one on how the Constitution became Christian. And this document discusses how the papacy they made 3 attempts to pay homage to the papacy. So one was it was around 1863. I'll just put it here to the 1900s.
Can I go back to Puteoli?
Whoops. Sorry, Kathy.
Did someone have a question or
Yeah,
comment?
Kathy has a question. I kind of muted her thinking it was somebody accidentally on, but she has a question.
So
Yep.
go back to Yodai.
Yep.
Kathy.
Kathy, you'll have to unmute.
Where'd she
Am
go?
I? Okay, okay. I've tried 3 times, so I don't know what happened.
We can hear you.
I wanted to give the definition of Puteoli, the Bible
Sure.
definition. Little wells or mineral springs.
Okay, thank you.
That's Puteoli. That's all I wanted. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So yeah, Puteoli being the mineral springs. We know minerals are good. This is where all these goods are being taken to. So I guess that makes sense. Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, so this article, how the Constitution became Christian. They had these 3 attempts to pay homage. Protestantism had these 3 attempts from 1863 to 1900s, 1950 to 1979 onwards. So the introduction to this article, we'll read just a small section. But Protestantism had concerns over the increasing population and power of a number of people. And so can anyone, I'll give the first one and then hopefully it'll prick our memories. But there was 4 groups that Protestantism saw or perceived as threats. So the first one was free thinkers. Does anyone remember the other 3?
Jews,
Jews, yes, I can see Susan.
Catholics,
SDA.
Yes, thank you, Christine. Now, with our, this is where this document, how the Constitution became Christian, starts to enlighten us, I guess, because we go, oh yeah, free thinkers, Jews and Seventh-day Adventists, they're all Sabbath keepers. And then you get to Catholics and it's like, oh, okay, they keep the same day. So why would Protestantism not be happy with Catholicism? Why would they see them as a threat as well? So we'll go into this and remind ourselves why in a moment. But the relationship between the two, between Catholicism and Protestantism at this time, it wasn't, they weren't exactly friends. They had this enmity. And this question that Elder Tess asked, you know, what was the relationship at this time in 1860? Yes, and freethinkers. We'll elaborate on freethinkers in a moment. Thank you for correcting me there, Elaine. This question of the relationship between Protestantism and Catholics, it's so important to ask back in April of 2021, because still a lot of people, even in the movement, were having doubts about the conclusions that we're coming to, because they were still convinced that there had to be this friendship between Catholicism and Protestantism at the end of the world, this coming together. But they're looking at Pope Francis and Donald Trump, and they're not getting along. So they have this problem. But what we want to see here is that back in 1888, so back in this time period, they weren't friends here either. And this is when Protestantism was pushing for this. They were trying to enforce the observance of Sunday. Now, we spoke about the other article that Jared Goldstein has on nativism, and how a group of people were treated back in 1888. So there's this party called the No Nothing Party back in around the 1840s. Does anyone remember them? And what they were trying to do to keep Catholics out. So they didn't like Irish Catholics. Does anyone remember what they did?
You're talking about national reform?
Yeah, that's part of it too, but it was the Know Nothing Party, or the American Party they call it.
Oh, okay.
And they were the ones that articulated predominantly the opposition to Irish Catholics. Do you remember what they were pushing for?
I don't remember it being the Know Nothing Party, but I know they wanted an amendment to the Constitution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it. They wanted to, because when we think about free thinkers, they want to be free, right? They want the freedom to do whatever they want. They don't want to have Sunday observance. So they're not going to like Sunday law. That's not going to be good for them. They're not going to be happy. Same with the Jews. Sabbath observers, they don't want a Sunday law. Same with Seventh-day Adventists. But then when we get to Catholics, how can you enforce observance? They're going to be, yeah, that's Sunday. Brilliant, that's our day. Perfect. They're going to be fine with that, aren't they? But as we'll read here, the Know Nothing Party adopted a platform that articulated its opposition to Irish immigration in expressly constitutional terms. Irish Catholics brought disease, stole American jobs, and even worse, they claimed that Catholics would always be loyal to a foreign despot and could never embrace the principles of the American Constitution. So they'd never be able to amalgamate with the beautiful form of America, and that America's ethos of liberty and the ethos of Rome, despotism, are two eternal opposites. So these Irish Catholics that are coming, they're always going to be Irish Catholics. They're never going to be true Americans. So therefore, they have to amend the Constitution in order to keep Catholics out. So let us share screen for a second. Okay, can you all see this picture, this cartoon?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So what we have here is, this is a cartoon by a person called Thomas. Thomas Nass. Now, we don't have to specifically remember his name, but he's just the person that that pioneered these political cartoons. Because this is from this one's from, I think, 1870, so it's a while ago. But Thomas was born in 1840 and died in 1902. But he pretty much pioneered political cartoons, even all the way down to the ones we see today. This is very early on, 1870. So in this one, we have the Pope surrounded by bishops and some of his military, some of his army, and they're on top of the dome of St. Peter in Rome. And they're pointing towards the United States. So they're looking out the United States over the Atlantic, and like they're plotting to conquer America. So what this does is it generates this fear among Protestants, and we can see how this perceived threat from Catholics and this kind of conspiracy theory originates, where it originates from. So, of course, the Millerites weren't buying into this, but this was other Protestants that were. Okay. This is the next one by the same person. And it's talking about the showing the connection between those who come to the United States and how impossible it is for them to sever their ties with Rome. So the caption says, the US, allow me to sever you from your foreign mother church, tied to his mother's apron strings. So this is a German flag here with a German military person, and this person's being still tied to Rome. So we can kind of get the idea that immigrants aren't considered to be true Americans because they're always going to have this connection back to Rome. Okay, this next one is, we can see all these school children here, this US public schools building, and how they've got these bishops in the form of alligators coming for all these school children. And if we zoom in here, we notice this says, you may not be able to read it, but it says the Political Roman Catholic School. So Rome is coming for your school children. So it's quite a fearful message. And also this says Tammany Hall here. So I looked up what that was. That's from New York. It was a society that was predominantly, by 1850, the vast majority were Irish Catholics. So just more conspiracies about Rome taking over the United States and affecting and coming for all the school children and trying to change their education. Okay. This next one, we see the Pope here sitting with a earpiece, listening to the Republican vote and the Democratic vote, hiding behind this curtain, the curtain of religion. But essentially, Catholicism having infiltrated America, and I guess it's the same kind of mentality as an Adventist who I've had someone say this to me, well, it doesn't matter who's in power because Rome controls everything. It doesn't matter who the president is because, you know, the papacy is controlling, pulling all the strings at the end of the world. These kind of conspiracy theories. This one, the subtle conspirator. Rome, once again, coming for the public schools, for the education system. So you can see, you can really get the idea of this perceived threat that Rome's coming to change all the, to start with the public schools and change the mindset of America. This next one is a little bit later. It's from around the 1920s. And we notice that this crusader, what they're wearing is a Ku Klux Klan outfit, and they're holding the Bible. And the KKK were actually the most fundamental defenders against Catholicism back in this time period. So they're sitting on this Catholic, whatever they are, priest or something, and they've conquered them because they're holding the flag, and they've conquered them with the Bible. So we can see the kind of culture, the kind of image that was being presented back then of Catholicism in America. And our last one, see if I can find. Okay, this one here. Yeah, same deal. Crusader with a pretty much a KKK outfit, and Rome trying to come in and possess America, and then coming to beat down. Rome's going to be beaten down by this Klansman here. But the idea that Rome's this evil demonic hand coming to possess America. Okay, so yeah, I hope that helps give us just a bit of an illustration of what was happening back then through these political cartoons that went all the way from the 1840s all the way down to the 1900s, 1910s, 20s, 30s. But noting that it didn't end in the 19th century, that it continued on, and in 1888, that this mindset, these conspiracy theories are still in full swing. And this is what strikes fear into the heart of Protestants, noting that it's not Adventism, but it's all these Catholics coming. They did see Adventism as a threat, but nowhere near to the degree of Catholicism. Okay, so now with these conspiracy theories in mind, who do we think of today that is the prominent conspiracy theorist in Adventism?
Walter White.
Yes, Walter White. Many of us have probably watched a lot of his material, and the way he presents things is pretty similar to what we've just been looking at with those pictures pretty much. He just packages it in the way that kind of gives it an Adventist stamp. But the important thing to note is that it's nothing new. He's got no new message, that these kind of conspiracy theories have been happening for a while. So going back to in 2018 in Arkansas, Elder Tess did a number of studies, as we know, with the Midnight Cry, but she spoke about the Chicago World Fair. Does anyone remember what year that was?
1891 or 2 in there somewhere.
3, I think.
Okay, I think it's 3. Yeah.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, 1893. Back in this time period is the main thing. And we remember that Protestants tried to enforce the observance of Sunday with the Chicago World's Fair. And at this time, Adventists decided to form the International Religious Liberty Association. And in doing this, they wrote some papers in response to this, to Protestants who were trying to enforce this Sunday observance. And they wrote these papers against it. And what happened was some Catholics in Baltimore got a hold of them and read them. And so then they decided to write a response to the Adventists who were claiming that Sunday observance isn't biblical, there's no evidence for it. And the Catholics came out and said, yep, you're right, there is no biblical evidence. If you're observing Sunday, you're giving us honor, you're worshipping Catholicism, because that's what we've said. We've given a stamp to Sunday and changed the day, as we well know as good Adventists. So what's happening is, even though this was 1893, and even though Protestantism really doesn't like Catholicism come out and said, look, worshipping on the same day, like they're pretty much openly mocking Protestantism and saying, you're worshipping on Sunday, like you're Sunday observing. Even the Adventists are doing the right day. So in honouring Sunday, you're paying homage to us. So we connect this homage of forcing observance by Protestantism. This homage is they're paying homage through this hatred. And yes, it was probably the Catholic mirror. Yeah, thank you, Susan. Okay. So this is our this history. So this is the history here, 1888, that we've been looking at here with how Protestantism was trying to get, of paying homage to the papacy and trying to enforce Sunday observance. If we come down to the 1950s, we won't get too much into detail for this, but we're just going to kind of introduce it a little bit. Now, does anyone remember what the fundamentalist modernist controversy was about? Fundamentalist modernist controversy. It was around the 1920s, 1930s.
I was trying to look that up last night. But from memory, some of it was, well, I might have it wrong. I think I'm looking at a later history. Never mind.
You might have it right though.
Well, I know that the fundamentalists got themselves kind of connected and wrapped into fascism. So I think I'm talking about the later history.
Yeah, a little bit later, but that's still correct. Yeah. But this.
And gave Christianity a bad name.
Yes, and that's kind of where we're going. But this controversy that happened, it was originated in the 1920s, 1930s within the Presbyterian Church in America. Long story short, you've got fundamentalists and modernists fighting. Modernists pretty well win the arguments that they were having. And the fundamentalists, they didn't die, but they kind of lived on through a few institutions such as the Bible Moody Institute, Wheaton College, and Bob Jones University. But 2.5 decades after this fundamentalist and modernist controversy, this fight, we have a young fundamentalist come onto the scene. Does anyone know his name? Someone, so this is, what year?
You got an answer in the chat.
Thank you. I'm trying to see who said that. It only says W.
It's
Billy One. Okay, thank you, One. Yeah, Billy Graham, that's correct. So we know where Billy Graham's for my time, but I still know about him. And many of us know who he was and what the influence he had in while he was alive with his crusades and whatnot. And I think in the subsequent studies we're going into Billy Graham. There is a book that we, let me see if I can just pull it up here just to remind ourselves of what it looks like. If we remember the Evangelicals, that book. Looks like so it's got this, oops. This is the front page of it, if we remember it. The Evangelicals, the struggle to shape America. And this is talking about early in the 20th century. If that helps us to remember this book. And we're just going to quote just a little bit from it. But the sentiments from it were pretty much, we can see how these sentiments of Catholics being a threat kind of passed down to this next history. So throughout the 1920s, J. Frank Norris maintained that the Catholics were attempting to take over the government and overturn the Constitution. In the early 1930s, a number of other leaders, among them Arno Gabelin, James M. Gray, William B. Riley, and Gerald Winrod, embraced the notorious forgery, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, and integrated it into their end times scenarios, uncomfortably as it sat with their prophetic Zionism. According to Riley, a Jewish communist cabal was secretly plotting to establish a single world government and to impose a uniform atheistic religion on the enslaved populations of the world. Now, a secret plot to establish a single world government, who does that remind you of? We've spoken about him already today, but I'm getting lots of Walter Weiss bells ringing in my head. Riley and Winrod, who led the defenders of the Christian faith, maintained that apostate Jews were already taking over American finances, courts, and newspapers, and, as Riley put it, making ready to filch the land of all its gold, take over its cattle and its farms, and possess themselves of all its factories, arts, and industries. So more of these conspiracy theories being cultivated. And again, we can mark that this was well before Walter Weiss and before he came onto the scene in Adventism, peddling all these conspiracy theories about Rome and whatnot. Additionally, when the Great Depression in America, and we had the next president, Franklin D. Roosevelt, came in, a socialist, and he set up, he did a number of things to help recover from this Great Depression for the country. And one of them was to form the National Recovery Administration. And they had this blue insignia, and on it was a blue eagle. And the fundamentalists claimed that this eagle was the mark of the beast. So this organization, to help the country recover from the Great Depression, there's something behind it. This new organization, more sowing seeds of doubt, and we know how dangerous that becomes. So there's this, they had this, the fundamentalists and the modernists had this big fight. The fundamentalists kind of faded into the background, but continued through a few institutions that we mentioned. And by the late 1940s, fundamentalism wasn't doing so good, but Billy Graham comes along and he's going to pretty much revive this fundamentalism. So in the 1950s, let's do it here. So in the 1950s, Christians and I think someone's already touched on it already. I think maybe it was you, Elaine, speaking about fascism, but they had to change their name. I think you said what they changed it to, because they didn't want to be associated with fascism. So how did they do that? What did they call themselves?
The title of the book.
Christians.
The evangelicals.
So that was fundamentalism. Fundamentalism.
Oh, I'm sorry. I know what you're asking.
Yeah.
The Judeo-Christian.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Christians became, so they weren't Christians anymore. They became Judeo-Christian. and the fundamentalists became evangelicals, because Christians, they wanted to distance themselves from, this is 1950, so they've just gone through the Second World War. We know what happened there with Germany and the Nazis and Hitler. So they didn't want to be perceived to be anti-Jewish or anything, or connected to fascism in that way. So they wanted to kind of rebrand themselves. Similarly, the fundamentalists, they weren't very popular. They'd kind of gone downhill, so they needed to rebrand themselves. And they did that through calling themselves evangelicals. And this is where Billy Graham comes in. So all they've done here really is just rebranded themselves. So they've got a business, they've declared themselves bankrupt, and they've just started again with a different name, doing the same thing. So that's pretty much all they've done. So this is pretty much as far as Elder Tess gets in this study of homage through hatred. It was a short one. It was only like an hour, and also there was some translation, which means there's even less content, as there would be for like a Vespers. But I think in the next study, we go into more on Billy Graham and this time period with the 1950s. So just to kind of run us through where we've gone, we first of all reminded ourselves that the threat for the Sunday law doesn't come from Protestantism. Protestantism isn't the whole, it's not the cause of the threat for the Sunday law. We know now that the bigger danger is from new atheism and libertarianism and men's rights activism. So, but looking at Protestantism and how certainly we focused on the 1888 time period and how the Sunday law then was, they were trying to enforce the observance and thus paying homage to the papacy despite their hatred of Catholicism. And we did this by taking the line of Alexandria, so this whole line, this whole horizon, and we stepped back and saw how this one ship makes it to shipwreck, that there's a separation of two classes here, that a work is done in between on the island of Malta, and then Paul and the rest of the company is taken on the second ship, which came from the same place, Alexandria, but they're all going to, they had the same destination of Puteoli. And this helps us to see how the events of shipwreck, what that's going to look like, and how more importantly, we focused on 1888 with the Sunday law there not being, there wasn't this friendship, there wasn't this mateship between the papacy and Protestantism, like many of us used to believe. So we pointed out how the Protestants viewed Catholics and free thinkers and Jews through the article from Jared Goldstein, how the Constitution became Christian, and what Protestants did to Irish Catholics that were coming to the United States because of the Great Potato Famine. They came to the United States, and how Protestantism was going to address the threat, the perceived threat of Catholics. They couldn't just have a Sunday law, because a Sunday law, while it would address 3 of these groups, it wouldn't affect the threat that they saw from Catholicism. So yeah, we looked at a few political cartoons of the day. We reminded ourselves that Walter Weiss wasn't the originator of conspiracy theories, and that he was just kind of rebranding things with an Adventist flavor, I guess. So yeah, in the next study, we go into a bit more on Judean Christians and evangelicals and Billy Graham. So I hope that's helped us to remind ourselves of how Protestantism pays homage to the papacy. I think we'll probably close in prayer, and then we'll have some questions if there's any. Let's kneel. God in heaven, we do thank you especially for this wonderful Sabbath, that we are able to come together and worship you through the study of history. We thank you especially for our leaders and how we've been led over the past number of years through parable methodology to give us the correct understanding of the times in which we live. We thank you for especially Acts 27, that study that gives us such a deeper knowledge of the beginning of modern Israel all the way to the end. We thank you that we're able to see these things from one horizon to the other, and we ask that as we continue this Sabbath, you be with us, that you bless us, and that you continue to work through us as we develop our understanding and knowledge to encourage and help those that are coming into your kingdom. We thank you for all your blessings in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.